Hi, I'm Lisa from Fresh Eggs Daily, and today I'm going to be talking about storing and harvesting herbs through the winter. So I'm just getting some things ready here. I'll start in a minute or two. Just want to let some time go by so some people can start watching. It's a little bit shady here. So it's been kind of cold here. We live in Maine, and we've had a couple of hard frosts already. So our garden is slowly turning brown. The vegetable garden is done for, but some of our herbs are hanging in there still. So hopefully for some of you further south, you still have time to harvest a lot of your herbs before they get frosted and you can't use them anymore. But anyway, so as I said, I am Lisa Steele from Fresh Eggs Daily, which is a natural chicken keeping website and Facebook page. And I'm excited to be here on the Kellogg Garden Facebook page doing what will be hopefully the first in a series of Facebook Live events for you all. Some of you who may raise chickens might already follow me, and for those of you who don't, if you're thinking about raising chickens or you do raise chickens, definitely head over to my Facebook page or my website, fresheggsdaily.com. But anyway, I've kind of partnered with Kellogg Garden. I've been gardening for a long time, longer than I've been raising chickens. And herbs are one of my favorite things to grow. So today we're going to be talking about, I'm going to give you a brief overview on growing herbs just because it's super easy, and for anyone who doesn't already grow them, at least it can get you maybe thinking about starting in the spring. And then we're going to be talking about harvesting and storing herbs through the winter. I use lots of herbs, both in my cooking and with my chickens. So it's important to me to not waste any of my harvest. I can definitely use all that I can grow. It's kind of windy, so I hope the phone doesn't blow over. I just have it kind of propped on a wooden crate. But anyway, so we got asked some questions, and I had a little notebook. I have a little notebook here. I wrote down some questions that some of you asked prior to the event. Please feel free to post questions underneath, either on my page or here on this thread, and I will go back through afterwards and answer them. And we also have we're going to have a blog post that will kind of sum up all the information and also answer questions that people have asked. So anyway, feel free to ask questions during this event. I'm probably not going to get to them during the event. It's just so distracting to try to answer questions, talk, everything, and I get distracted really easily anyway. I do tend to ramble. So anyway, I'm going to put that somewhere where it won't blow away. It's really very windy today. So anyway, to start off, herbs, I basically focus on the culinary herbs. So we're talking mint, rosemary, parsley, cilantro, thyme, oregano, marjoram, tarragon. I do love to use them in my cooking. If you have chickens, you have a lot of eggs, and there's nothing better for scrambled eggs or an omelet than fresh herbs. So I use them fresh in the summer in my cooking and with my chickens, as I mentioned, and then also dried in the winter. So if you've never grown herbs, so behind me is my herb garden. It's maybe 2x4. Doesn't have to be very large. Herbs don't take up a lot of space. Our chickens have kind of ravaged it. They like to take their dust baths in it. So there's craters and holes, and they just completely destroyed all my dill. But anyway, a 2x4 raised bed is a perfect space for an herb garden. It's in full sun most of the day. Most herbs are Mediterranean, so they really enjoy lots of sun, dry conditions. They like sandy soil, well-drained soil, not big fans of humidity at all. We grew herbs in Virginia before we moved here to Maine. We've been here in Maine a little over 2 years. I do grow the same herbs here that I grew in Virginia. So we went from a zone 7 to a zone 5. We can grow the same things. It's just that your timing, little notes are going to blow away. The timing of your planting might be a little bit different. You might have to harvest them at a little bit different times, but it's basically the same thing. You can grow herbs from seeds. I like to grow herbs in pots or planters. Like I said, they don't take up a lot of space, so you don't even need a garden. You can grow herbs in little pots. Sprinkle some seeds, thyme, oregano. Mint especially is great to grow in pots because mint will spread like crazy. I I have some mint over in my other garden that I'll show you in a little bit. But if you grow mint, it's going to become a ground cover. So I really like to grow it around my chicken coop. Mint is supposed to keep mice away. My mom swears by it. She has it planted all around the bulkhead to her basement in Massachusetts, and she swears she has not had mice in the basement since she did that. Other people, I have a friend in New Hampshire who puts mint, fresh mint bundles in her cabinets in the winter to keep the mice from moving in. So whether you believe it or not, mint smells really great. It's pretty. When it flowers, it's beautiful. And of course you can use it for mojitos and all kinds of good cocktails too. So anyway, so you can plant herbs from seeds. You can plant them from seedlings. Most of the garden shops and online sites are going to sell little herb seedlings. Lots of herbs are perennials, not as many here in Maine as in Virginia, of course, but the mint, thyme, oregano, rosemary, lavender, those things all are going to come back year after year. So spending $4 or $5 on a little plant that's going to spread and come back is really a great deal. So herbs are super easy to grow. They're not super picky about the kind of soil you grow them in, or they do like sun, but you can also plant them in the shade. You can divide them. You can pretty much transplant them any time of year. They're not going to complain about it. If you forget to water them, they're okay with that. So if you're not good at gardening, I would definitely say give herbs a try. I mean, mint is literally impossible to kill. I mean, so that's one reason I like herbs. Another reason I love herbs is because they produce for you through the whole season. Most crops, you plant your plant, you watch it grow, it flowers, it gets its fruit or vegetables, you harvest them, you're done. Herbs, they keep producing all season long. In fact, they do better if you trim them and prune them through the season. Your plants will get really tall and leggy and more like trees if you don't prune them. So what you want to do is throughout the growing season, trim off the tips, the tops, kind of form them into shrub-like kind of forms instead of a tree. Your plants are going to be bushier and fuller and produce more. So when you, throughout the season when you're harvesting your herbs, you want to, if you can see your herb here, you want to trim them just above a set of leaves. So either using your fingers, or these are my herb scissors, little herb scissors, you just want to trim off that top part, just like that. So as I mentioned, I give them to the chickens. If you're making, you know, pesto or whatever, and you trim your basil, you can get a nice pesto dinner and leave your plant intact. You don't want to trim off more than 1/3 of your plant at any one time, because you want to leave it enough so it still, you know, can flourish and grow. So throughout the season, you trim off your plants as you need them. Then before the first frost, basil, well before the first frost. My basil is always the first to die off. So it doesn't like temperatures even down into the 40s. It'll turn black and die. So, you know, in late summer, early fall, you're going to want to harvest your basil. One thing that I love to do is trim off some tops of my plants, maybe 6 inches or so, put them in a glass of water, and once they sprout roots, you can plant them in a container and keep it on your kitchen windowsill. Or you can plant the seeds right in a container and have containers of basil on your kitchen windowsill all winter long. I happen to love basil, and it's one that does really good in containers. So my kitchen windowsill herb garden is a big favorite. These actually I planted from seed right in the containers, and I have a whole row of them on the kitchen counter. Another thing you can do, parsley is a lot more cold hardy. We've actually had a couple of hard frosts here in Maine already, and my parsley looks great. It actually looks better now than it did during the heat of the summer. But when you trim your herbs, you don't even bother planting them. Just put them in mason jars full of water on your kitchen windowsill. I have kept herbs alive all winter this way. Sage, here's some sage. These are things that I harvested out of the garden this past week. You want to remove all the leaves that are below the water line, because they'll just rot and mold. But you can leave this parsley and you'll get another couple weeks out of it, which is a great way to extend your growing season. Another way to extend your growing season is, just going to turn this around a little, a cold frame. So that's another section of my herb garden right next to the coop. And that cold frame, which is basically just plexiglass and a wooden frame, is going to keep the heat in from the sun, and you can extend your growing season a couple more weeks that way also. So here's some mint that I cut and I put into just water on my windowsill. You want to change the water maybe every week or so, but you really, I mean, last winter I kept rosemary on the windowsill in water all winter long, and then come spring I just planted it back in the ground. So that's a super easy, lazy man's way of extending your herb season. But anyway, so some of you are going to want to harvest your herbs and actually store them. So there's lots of ways to store your herbs through the winter. Drying is probably the most common, the easiest. I air dry all my herbs. You can use a dehumidifier. You can use a dehydrator. You can put them in an oven on low. You can microwave them. But I just prefer to air dry them. It's much easier. So you can harvest them. Now, when you're doing your end of season harvest, you want to cut your plants right down to the ground level. I mean, you can harvest everything at that point. But if you harvest kind of the ends and then keep working down the plant, tie the bunches together with pieces of twine, and then you can just hang them and air dry them. If you happen to have an old rake, hanging them on the tines of the rake and then just standing the rake up in your the edge of your kitchen or mudroom or whatever is a really great way to dry your herbs. They'll take varying times to dry depending. So you can dry them in bunches. They're really pretty and it's easy, but I prefer to just dry the leaves. Take another plant. So you're going to harvest your oregano, say, and I'm going to strip all the leaves off of the stem. You probably don't want to eat the stems anyway. If you're using the herbs for cooking, they're going to be woody. You might want to keep some thyme or rosemary as a sprig because sometimes people like to add that to sauces or stews or whatever. But for the other herbs, you want to take them off the stems. So I air dry them on window screens. I actually made this kind of cool tiered herb drying rack out of old picture frames and window screens. Details are on my website, freshesdaily.com, if you search tiered herb drying rack. But this way you can separate your different types of herbs, and I just put the leaves. Your leaves are going to dry quicker than the whole stem. And I just let them air dry like that until they're crumbly and crunchy, fully dry. At that point, what I'm using for the chickens, I don't bother separate. I mix them all together into this great glass jar that says dried herbs. So I've got basil, oregano, sage, parsley, cilantro, all the different types of herbs all mixed together because I'm just going to be using to add to my chicken feed. But if you're going to be using them in their cooking, obviously you want to keep them separate. So you can use mason jars. These little ones are kind of cool. Here's some mint. Here's some dill. You don't want to put them in jars until they're completely dry. You don't want to crush the herbs until you're ready to use them. They're going to retain the most flavor if they're not crushed. So you can see these leaves are pretty much still intact. So you want to leave them as whole as possible while you're storing them. And then once you use them, you can crush them up and you'll get a lot more flavor and oils out of them that way. Another thing that I like to do, if you splurge a little and you buy a really nice jar of herbs, like oregano here at the store, once you've used up the oregano, you can use this to store your own oregano, and this way all your jars are already labeled so you know what's what, which is kind of neat. So when you harvest your oregano or your herbs, whether you're doing it end of season or throughout the season, you actually want to do it in late morning. You want to wait until all the dew has dried off of the leaves. They'll tend to mold if they're wet. So you want to let them dry off, but you don't want them to be under full sun because once the sun starts beating on them, they're going to lose some of their flavor. So for maximum flavor, you want to harvest mid-morning after the dew has dried off of them. You also want to harvest your herbs regularly throughout the season before they flower. Most herbs, all herbs I guess, flower. And once they flower, they can lose a little bit of taste, become a little bitter. I personally, since I'm using most of the herbs for my chickens, I love to let my herbs go to flower. Our local bees, native bees, really, really love them. Plus, some herbs are really pretty. Yeah, all the flowers have died, but thyme has little pretty white flowers. Basil purple Thai basil has gorgeous purple flowers. So, I mean, you almost have a little flower garden if you let your herbs go to flower. And the bees and other pollinators really do love them. So, up to you. You're going to sacrifice some flavor, but you're going to have some really pretty flowers for your pollinators. But for the most part, you do want to harvest your herbs before they flower. So, another way to store your herbs through the winter, you can add them to vinegar and make flavored herb infused vinegars, like for salad dressings and things. Vinegar is acidic, so you really don't have to worry about any kind of bacteria growing in it, but you can just take fresh sprigs of herbs and put them into vinegar, white wine, champagne vinegar, whatever. You can also make flavored oils, adding some herbs to olive oil. You have to be careful there because you can actually grow really icky stuff in oil. So what I like to do is chop up some fresh herbs. I especially like to do this with basil. And then I sprinkle it into ice cube trays, maybe fill them about halfway with the chopped basil, and then fill the each compartment with olive oil and then freeze them. Once they're frozen, you can pop the little cubes out and put it in freezer bags. But that way, when I'm making pasta, for example, I can just heat up that oil in the skillet, maybe add some sliced garlic, some sliced black olives, and while the pasta's cooking, that's heating up, and then I've got some really, really fragrant herbal olive oil to use on my pasta. You can also cook steaks or other meats in the olive oil that has the herbs in it, so freezing herbs in olive oil is a great idea. Obviously, pesto. If you're in a panic and it's getting cold and you still have a ton of basil, you can make pesto. There's also a great recipe for pesto on my website, freshexdaily.com. You can also make pesto out of parsley. It doesn't have to just be basil. So, like I said, herbs, super easy to grow, super great because you can harvest them all through the season, and many of them will last and come back the next year. In Virginia, we actually had some herbs that would actually, I could keep harvesting them through the winter, especially the ones that were planted right next to the house because they stayed a little bit warmer. Here, we're about to lose them all pretty soon, but anyway, so let me see, I wanted to take you over. Before I answer some questions, I just want to give you a little bit closer look. Like I said, my chickens really do a number on the herb garden. So I think you can see. So here's parsley. It's looking great. We've had temperatures down to 40. My sage is also looking really great. Somebody asked about, and I don't remember who asked the question, but I will look it up in a bit, about pineapple sage. Pineapple sage is not cold tolerant at all. This is what my pineapple sage looks like. Not doing well at all. So pineapple sage isn't a good choice for cold climates, although it's really pretty with the red flowers, and hummingbirds like it and butterflies really like it. And then here's some mint and some oregano. So as I mentioned, here's my cold frame, which is really going to extend the life of the mint that's in there. I'll just give you a look at, there's some thyme and sage. The shadows in there. And over here I have got some oregano. And here's some catmint. Pretty purple flowers on the catmint, and my regular mint, which, as you can see, it's really taking over. So, all right, so heading back after that short little interlude. Okay, so we're back. So I am going to answer some questions that people asked. Okay, so it was Tisha who asked about the pineapple sage. Again, pineapple sage, really pretty, smells great, really does smell like pineapple, but it's not cold hardy at all. So you're going to lose that really early in the season. So Dawn said that her rosemary always turns brown. Sorry, the ducks making a racket. So Dawn said her rosemary always turns brown. I would say, most herbs really don't mind being really, really dry. It's really hard to lose them if you forget to water them. Sometimes, if I really, really forget, they'll start to get wilty and flop over, but as soon as you water them, they just come right back. So I would say maybe for the rosemary, maybe try planting it in a place that's got a little bit of shade and harvest it a little bit earlier. You know, it could be that it is reacting to the cold weather. Oh, so Sherry, on the photo that's on Facebook, on the Kellogg Garden page and also on my page, Sherry asked where I got my shirt. I actually had that shirt made. It was from an Etsy seller. I don't believe that they're in business anymore, but it is a really cute shirt. Thank you. Okay, so, oh, I forgot to write the name down on this one, but somebody asked if thyme and oregano are dried the same way. Like I said, I dry all my herbs. I just air dry them. I'm not in a terrible hurry, so some dry quicker than others. But eventually they do all dry if you air dry them. So yes, thyme and oregano can be dried the same way. Thyme, I would leave some sprigs though, or you can take the leaves off of the stems and just dry the leaves if you wanted to dry it quicker. So Moises, I guess it is, said that cilantro, lettuce, broccoli always bolt. Now bolting basically means that they go to flower, and you don't want that for taste reasons. A lot of the colder weather crops will bolt if it gets too warm. So say in Virginia, we had trouble with that also. Lettuce, broccoli would all flower instead of actually producing and you know, producing the leaves. So I would say plant earlier in the season. I don't know where this person lives, but it might be that you're planting too late in the season. I would plant earlier in the season or later in the season, and maybe even grow those through the winter. In Virginia, we grew Brussels sprouts, broccoli, kale, chard, all those kind of things. We grew them through the winter because in the summer it was just too hot for them, and they did much better in the colder weather. Actually, I did just see a comment from Highlands Giving Garden asking if you have to wash herbs off before drying. You don't want to wash them. If you add moisture to them, there's a good chance that they'll mold or mildew. So no, I just kind of brush the dirt off. There really isn't very much dirt on them. If you're really concerned, I suppose you could wait like till after a rainstorm when there isn't dirt on them. So Daisy asked a question. I believe she was asking about moving a large plant. So herbs are super forgiving. I mean, I dig them up, I separate them. They do tend to spread. The thyme and mint and all of your herbs really like to spread. So I'm constantly hacking off pieces and replanting them, and you start new plants that way. And I don't really find that they care what season or when you do that. But if you have a really big plant, I would actually suggest maybe trying to just cut pieces of it off and creating a bunch of smaller plants. Nancy asked about lavender. There are so many varieties of lavender. Which one is the most fragrant? I guess that was her question. Which one smelled the best? Whatever. There are over 450 varieties of lavender. The most common is English lavender. That tends to be what people grow. It's actually not from England. It's from the Mediterranean, like most of the other herbs, but it was called English lavender because it does really well in England. England has a similar climate to lots of parts of the United States, so it's become very popular here. There's also French lavender, which isn't nearly as hardy, and it's used mostly for your essential oils. But I would say basically if you check a nursery or other online site, they're usually going to have pictures and descriptions of the lavender. So read the description, see if it's going to be good for your growing zone, if you like what it looks like, and then go from there. And sometimes you have to try a couple different varieties because one might do well, another won't, or one will do well in a certain area of your yard and then won't do well in another area. And lastly, Holly asked about stems. She said she had always heard that you shouldn't use the stems of herbs when you're cooking because they can be bitter. I agree. I mean, not only can they be bitter, but they're kind of woody and not really something you want to eat. So I do take the stems off of the herbs and I just dry and harvest the leaves. The stems certainly aren't going to hurt you. I actually chop the stems up and give them to the chickens. But yeah, I would agree with Holly that you just want to eat the leaves. So Ria, I guess it is, just mentioned that mint can be planted in the ground in a container with the bottom cut out. Like if you take a plastic bucket, cut the bottom off, sink that into the ground and plant your mint in it. Very true. Mint spreads like crazy. I happen to love mint. Comes in lots of different varieties. Chocolate mint, you know, peppermint, spearmint, obviously. Cinnamon mint, apple mint, orange mint. I plant it everywhere. I love it. It spreads because mostly where I'm planting it is around the chicken coop or in my herb garden where, you know, I don't really care. I find it very easy to just kind of rip it out when it goes where it's not supposed to. So anyway, so Peggy said she's originally from Massachusetts, but currently in North Carolina. It's hard to believe that anything grows through the winter in Maine. No, nothing grows through the winter, but a lot of things are perennial. So, you know, they die down in the winter, but then come spring, I'm going to, you know, the lavender comes back, oregano, thyme, you know, most of my herbs actually do come back. It's really the dill, parsley, and basil, and the peppermint sage that I need to buy each year. But dill and parsley actually are pretty good at reseeding themselves. So a lot of times your plants won't come back, but, you know, different plants that the seeds have dropped will come back. Someone did ask about, you know, saving seeds and planting herbs from seeds that you save. I don't do that. I probably should do that. But seeds are relatively cheap, so it's pretty easy just to buy new seed packets each year of the few things really that you need to plant each year. I mean, I mentioned at the beginning of this that I really love herbs a lot. And another reason is that there are so many varieties, you know, of thyme, not just lavender, but there's lemon thyme, there's all kinds of variegated thymes, you know, so you can get different varieties of these different herbs. Basil, same thing. There's tons of varieties of basil. There's a lot of varieties of parsley. The ducks. Anyway, you can grow herbs indoors on the windowsill, as I mentioned, either in dirt or in water, which is my favorite way. You can also, when you go to the grocery store, they have the fresh herbs in the produce section now. If you don't use it all, whatever you don't use, take those sprigs, remove the bottom leaves, put them in a glass of water, and keep them on the windowsill. They will grow roots, and you can plant them in dirt, plant them in the ground if it's in the summer. So that's another great way to get herbs started without it really costing you anything extra if you were already, you know, buying the herb for a recipe. So anyway, like I mentioned, please ask questions under this video, and I will go back through when we're done and answer it. And we also have a blog post that we'll put up with most of this information and any questions. So I hope you will join us for the next Facebook Live. It'll be November 14th at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We'll put reminders on the Keller Garden page and also on my page, Fresh Eggs Daily. And I guess that's it. Just looking at my checklist. So anyway, thank you for joining us today. And I hope you'll consider growing some herbs. They smell so good. I love walking past the herb garden and, you know, and just brushing against them and smelling them. And they do really make your cooking so much more flavorful. And they all have, they have great health benefits as well. So it's really a win-win when you're growing herbs, whether you have space for a garden or just space for some pots on your patio or back porch or windowsill. Consider growing herbs. So thank you to Keller Gardens for having me do this Facebook Live, and have a great day, and I hope we'll see you for the next event in November.